Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today by not Derek Brown, by only Pat Fitzmaurice. D-Bro is off doing general Christmas and holiday-related festivities with friends and family and whoever he's celebrating with. So we are holding down the fort without him. Happy holidays to D-Bro and to everybody who's watching and listening. It'll be just a two-man show with Fitz and myself. Fitz, I do love doing two-man shows with you, so I'm looking forward to talking about some key questions today.
Likewise for him. And I believe D-Bro is with the in-laws right now. So I'm glad he is biting that bullet for us. Here we get to have a nice conversation and not see our in-laws or
we
my
get to talk
anyway,
some fantasy football. This is our Friday show. We'll be running through key questions. We usually do kind of a top 10 key questions of the week. We're just going to do every game this week because a couple of games have already played, obviously, with the games taking place on Christmas. We are recording this on Thursday, so Thursday night football hasn't taken place yet, but by the time everybody's listening, it will have taken place. So we figured there's not as many games. We'll just get through them all. And plus, it's a fantasy championship game. We don't want to leave any matchups undiscussed in the most important week of the entire fantasy calendar, the week where everybody can win some titles. So as a quick reminder, as always, all of our weekly consensus rankings and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. And Fitz, before we jump in, we often will kind of talk about when we tape on Friday mornings, what did we see on Thursday night, and any fantasy takeaways. There's obviously not as much you can talk about in terms of immediate fantasy takeaways, but if you have a fantasy takeaway, if you have a football takeaway, what was your reaction to watching the couple of games on Christmas? And did you like having Wednesday games?
No, I didn't like having the games. Would prefer to be with family. And there are days when NFL Sunday happens to fall on Christmas or whatever. If Christmas fell on a Saturday and they wanted to do a couple of games that day, fine. But I don't know about forcing the issue the way they did. And I basically watched like 5 plays of Ravens Texans, and luckily it wasn't much of a game anyway. Neither game really competitive. So maybe that was a blessing for anyone who actually wanted to pay attention to their family on Christmas Day. So didn't love it. And I know they weren't great games. I know I've concerns for the Steelers' ability to go very far in the playoffs. I just think they're too limited on offense. They've one decent pass catcher in the offense. Like, that's a problem once you get in the playoffs and start facing teams with more firepower every week. And, like the Texans, I don't think anyone expects them to go on a Super Bowl run this year. They were sort of ahead of ETA in 2023. And now they've stalled out a little bit. And I'm not so much worried about CJ Stroud. I just think they need to fix the offensive line. And obviously they've had major injury problems at the wide receiver position this year. So I don't think it's going to be that hard to get the offense back on track, but they need to rebuild this offensive line because it has been just terrible this season.
This was the second year in a row that the Ravens played on Christmas, which obviously, I'm not going to miss the Ravens game as a fan. Last year it was at night, which worked out well because my family is a bunch of, they like to go to bed early. So I was kind of able to step away by the time we got to the night and you kind of just watch on my own. This year, a little tougher, but thankfully it wasn't in the morning. For me, that would have been really tricky when that's kind of like the height of our Christmas festivities, is that late morning, early afternoon. So I didn't watch a ton of Chiefs Steelers. I mean, we had it on and we're somewhat paying attention, but there's little kids running around and, we're eating and playing games. So it's more of a background experience and then trying to focus more on the Ravens. I don't mind having the game to watch on Christmas, especially I think a night game, an annual night game would be fun. But I agree, if it's on a Wednesday, you should just skip that year. I know that they're trying to make it a thing. I know Netflix played a lot of money. I know they did this whole Saturday, Wednesday round robin, and it worked out well for the Ravens that they won both of those games, and worked out well for the Chiefs too. But I just think the quick turnaround late in the season, I would prefer if Christmas falls on a Thursday, do a triple header. Thursday through Sunday, I'm all in. Even a Monday, you can make it a Monday night week doubleheader. But Tuesday or Wednesday, to me going forward, I think that should kind of be left alone. And I especially feel bad, again, the Ravens 2 years in a row playing on Christmas. I feel bad for not just the players and coaches who have families that, 2 years in a row, but for the, the beat reporters who have to travel to this game and don't get to spend their time with the family. I thought that was really kind of uncool, the NFL, to do it to the same team 2 years in a row. But obviously I was very happy with the win in dominant, fashion. We were actually talking a little bit after we taped the Thursday show this week about the MVP conversation and, Lamar kind of re-cementing himself in that conversation. I've been kind of complaining this whole time about the wide gap in the odds. I thought it was insane that Josh Allen was like minus 900, minus 1,000 when Lamar had clearly better stats. We've said kind of a bit on the shows before, like, I don't have a problem with anybody who wants to vote for Josh Allen. He's having an unbelievable year. The problem is not somebody who favored him. The problem is somebody saying it's not close or the odds reflecting that it wasn't close. Lamar, gets another standalone game where he looks awesome. The stats weren't even that amazing just because he didn't need to do much because the Texans were terrible, but just another game of, a nearly 50-yard touchdown run and toying with open, defenders in the open field and just Lamar doing Lamar stuff. And the odds are now reflective of where I think they should be. I actually think Lamar maybe should be favored a little bit, but at least it's now much closer than it was.
I agree. And it is really hard to separate those two in terms of it. Like, even if you want to use the criteria, which player is more essential to his team's success, I don't know if you can separate them.
I think
That, like,
both teams will be picking in the top 5 without these quarterbacks.
probably.
Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see how that continues to play out. We're going to talk about Josh Allen's matchup later on. Let's start with the Sunday slate, though. Excuse me, the Saturday slate, because we got a triple header on Saturday. We're going to start with Chargers-Patriots. That's the first game kicking off on Saturday. If it's assuming he plays, which, as of right now, we are taping this again kind of early Thursday, so still up in the air. But if he plays, are we going right back to J.K. Dobbins starting him in fantasy?
Oh, man. I'm not sure about that, Worm. Like, I don't know what the return of J.K. Dobbins is going to look like, whether it happens at all this week, or if it does, whether it's, a 2-man show with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, a 3-man with Kamani Vidal thrown in there, or if it's just mostly J.K. Dobbins. I will probably have him ranked as a mid-range to low-end running back 3 if he does play. So I won't feel wildly confident about him, but like, I know Erickson, when we talked about this on our start sit show, he seemed pretty confident that they were going to go right back to J.K. Dobbins as the lead guy. I'm not quite as confident as he is, but that's in the range of possibilities.
Where do you expect to see ECR land on him? Not where are you ranking him, but where do you think we're going to see Dobbins ranked if we get word that he's playing?
Like RB 28, somewhere around there. I think I'll probably be like a little bit lower and a little bit more cautious with my ranking of him than ECR, but probably, yeah, RB 28, give or take a few spots.
I want to ask a second question on this game, just because you and I do, host the, the Dynasty show in the offseason. And we're bringing that back, you, me, and Bogman, of course, in January. And I wanted to kind of ask, because we talked a lot about Drake Maye after he was drafted. And in kind of those May conversations, May the month, not May the player, but in those May conversations during rookie draft season, it was a lot of talk about we really liked him as a prospect. The landing spot looks tricky, kind of a similar conversation to what we had talked about with CJ Stroud a year earlier. Really liked the player, but the landing spot was bad. I was kind of on the side of I'm just going to go for the talent, and a quarterback can make a situation look good all by himself. And I was still ranking Drake Maye fairly aggressively, I think, relative to consensus amongst the rookies. If we were doing a 2025, or I guess it'd be 2024 at this point, Dynasty rookie redraft, where would you be taking Drake Maye?
QB6, or sixth overall, I guess I should say, in Superflex, because my first 6 would be all quarterbacks. It would be Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, and Drake Maye. And I think you could even debate Drake Maye versus Jalen Hurts. Like, I'm not sure how sustainable the business model is for Hurts with the tush push and so much of his production coming through the air. Like, Maye is in that sweet spot where it's mostly about Drake Maye as a passer, but he adds rushing value. Like, he distinctly adds rushing value in fantasy. And what he has been able to do in like the steady weekly floor that he gives you, despite having quite possibly the worst group of wide receivers in the league. In fact, I don't even know if it's debatable. I think it's the worst. Not a great offensive line. I mean, it seems like half his passing yardage goes to his tight ends, Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper, every week. Like, what he has been able to do and how comfortable he has looked right off the bat bodes really well for him. I think he's going to be a star. I mean, maybe he approaches Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson territory where I don't think that's out of the question. And, like at worst, I think he's maybe like a little below Joe Burrow as a passer who adds more rushing value than Joe Burrow does.
What about amongst just the rookies? I mean, for me, like, I think he'd be easily the top pick besides Jane Daniels, who would be number one. But I think of everybody else, I would rather have him in a rookie dynasty draft over any of those guys from 2024.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think he's past Caleb Williams, even though I don't think Caleb has been like a flop by any
I
means.
still like Caleb. I don't want it to come across like I think I'm out on Caleb
Yeah.
entirely. Like, I'm just really that impressed with Maye.
Yeah, Caleb has been fine, and Bo Nix has certainly outkicked expectations, but I would rather have Drake May on my dynasty roster than either of those guys.
Let's look at the next Saturday game here. Broncos-Bengals, speaking of Bo Nix. I want to ask actually about the running backs. Are you willing to trust any Denver running back in your fantasy championship against what is a welcoming Bengals run defense?
Probably not, now that it looks like Jaleel McLaughlin is going to be back this week. I had Javonte Williams ranked RB27 with the expectation that Jaleel would miss another week. Now that Jaleel is coming back, I think Javonte is probably going to be outside my top 30. He did have 11 targets and 7 catches last week, and he played a very high percentage of the Broncos offensive snaps, but he only had 4 carries in that game. And we just have seen such an unpredictable division of labor, Worm. And I should just do a mea culpa here, since this is kind of an end of the year show. One of my biggest mistakes during draft season was over investing in the Broncos running backs. I took Javonte Williams or Jaleel McLaughlin, one of those guys on pretty much every team I drafted. And, part of it was thinking that the Denver running backs always, well, Sean Payton running backs are always so productive as pass catchers. And even that really hasn't worked out. There have been moments of pass catching productivity for Javonte Williams, like last week, and Jaleel McLaughlin throughout the season. But like, no guy has given you a steady 4 or 5 receptions a week. It's just been a mess. And, I definitely did not benefit from being heavily invested in Denver running backs this year.
Yeah, Debro obviously not on this episode, but I'm sure he would like a mea culpa on Jaleel McLaughlin, particularly, who I think he had ranked, I want to say RB24 during draft season. That's how kind of high he was on Jaleel, and has not panned out. My answer to this question is no. I'm just not willing to trust any of them. I am forced to in one league where it's a dynasty league. I did make the title. I have intentionally built to not have strong running backs, and am competing earlier than I expected. So Javonte Williams is the running back I have to run out there. But if I have any other option, I'm not starting a Broncos running back, even against this Cincy run defense. How about Cardinals-Rams? Where are you ranking whoever the Cardinals starting running back is this week, assuming it's not James Conner? And again, we are taping a couple days early, so by the time we get to Saturday, maybe it will be Conner playing. He's trending in a better direction than I think I anticipated earlier in the week. But if he is playing, obviously there's no question at all. If he's not playing, if it's Trey Benson or Michael Carter even, where are you ranking the starting Cardinals running back not named James Conner?
So right now I'm ranking Benson RB29 with the assumption that Connor is not going to play. I do think we'll probably get some of Michael Carter, maybe the primary passing down back for Arizona this week. They're out of the running for a playoff spot. And what really concerns me, Worm, with the Cardinals offense is that they just put both of their starting offensive tackles on injured reserve, Paris Johnson and Jonah Williams. So how functional is this offense going to be, even in, not a terrible matchup against the Rams? I'm just not that interested in starting any of the Arizona running backs this week if James Conner is not an option.
It's the most wonderful time of the year for getting in on all of the hoops, football, and hockey action at DraftKings Sportsbook. In the season of giving, We're being gifted college football and basketball, pro football and basketball, and pro hockey too, almost 24/7. So many games every day, so many opportunities to place your first bet. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and place your bet. We've got some hugely important matchups this week, including the aforementioned Broncos-Bengals on Saturday. Cincy was laying 3.5 points at home in this critical game for the AFC playoff picture earlier in the week. That's also the second highest total of the week at 50 points exactly. Vikings-Packers, also a terrific matchup. Minnesota's laying just a point at home. Lines and odds are subject to change on those games, but they look like great matchups here in week 17. And here's a gift for all new customers. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Happy holidays from DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, Fitz, let's now get to the Sunday slate. We'll start off with the Jets-Bills game. Down game from the Bills passing attack in week 16. Obviously, we aren't worried about a bounce back really from Josh Allen, considering how much he's carried fantasy managers most of the season, especially lately prior to week 16. But what about the other guys? Khalil Shakir, can you start any Bills in this game besides Allen and, of course, James Cook?
Yeah, I mean, probably only Shakir, but even he is not a real comfortable start. I've got him ranked as a low end wide receiver 3. I think I've got him ranked wide receiver 35. He's had fewer than 40 receiving yards in 3 of his last 4 games, and the problem is that the Bills have become kind of a fantasy nightmare other than Josh Allen. They rotate 3 running backs, they rotate 4 receivers, and they use 2 tight ends. And like the running back rotation has worked out just fine for James Cook. He's going to get his, but it's not just a 3 receiver configuration for them with Keon Coleman back from injury. Now they are using all of Shakir, Amari Cooper, Keon Coleman, and Mac Hollins, and they're all playing about the same number of snaps and running about the same number of routes. So yeah, I mean, I have Shakir wide receiver 35 and my next highest ranked Buffalo receiver, Amari Cooper, down at wide receiver 49. It's just really hard to trust any single pass catcher in this offense.
Do you feel like they're using Shakir differently? And I asked that as a way to frame early on in the season. A lot of people were talking about the fact that he was catching every target. If you look at his game log on FantasyPros, targets 3, receptions 3, targets 5, receptions 5, targets 6, receptions 6. And then there was a couple of games where it was off by 1, but he was catching every target but 1, or still every target for several weeks. Lately, that hasn't been the case. It's been 9 targets, 6 receptions. It's been 12 targets, 8 receptions. It's been 7 targets, 4 receptions, 8 and 5. It started to not be a lot of just catching literally everything for the last several weeks. Is there anything to that, or is that just kind of a fluke, small sample size?
No, that's a good question, and I have to dig into that, whether the average depth of target has increased for Khalil Shakir. If that's it, maybe it did when they didn't have Keon Coleman, who was sort of that established vertical threat, and maybe now Shakir goes back to being more of a strict possession receiver. So it's possible that's kind of how it came into play, not having Keon Coleman as that field stretcher, that they were maybe having Shakir run deeper routes, but I can't say that for a fact. He's still been pretty efficient, but yes, it has not been the hyper efficiency that we saw from Shakir earlier this season and pretty much all of last season too.
Let's go to Titans-Jaguars. As Erickson said, this is a Thursday night football game taking place on a Sunday. Rank Fitz in this game the 4 committee running backs in this matchup. So that's Tony Pollard, Tyjae Spears, Travis Etienne, and Tank Bigsby.
All right, I have both Titans running backs ranked ahead of both Jaguars running backs. I've got Pollard running back 19, Spears running back 25, Travis Etienne running back 26, and Tank Bigsby running back 33. We talked about this a little on the Start Sit show. I wish Pollard were just scratched so we could get a full Tyjae Spears game, in which case I'd probably have him inside my top. Definitely inside my top 15, maybe inside my top 12 even. Like, Spears has looked really good the last couple of weeks, and I would love to see him get the soul crack at this backfield against a Jaguars defense that, has given up a lot of fantasy points to running backs. And of course, part of that is selfish for him because I am flexing Tyjae Spears in a championship game this week.
It sounds like the kind of most difficult, and maybe it wasn't difficult for you, but the guys who are ranked closest together certainly were Spears and ETN, just one spot apart. The other guys, there's a bit of a gap. How do you parse between ETN and Spears? What do you, I mean, obviously you just kind of hit on Spears, but for the ETN side of things, why does he come down at running back 26 for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just that Tank Bigsby has looked better as a runner all year long. And so I don't know if I were calling the plays for Jacksonville, I would probably just divide it up like Bigsby is my early down guy and ETN is my designated passing down guy. It's been a little more interchangeable than that and a little more hard to parse from week to week. Whereas Spears now, it seems like they are trying to preserve Tony Pollard a little bit, and they've pretty much made Tyjae Spears the main passing down back, and he gets a little bit of early down work too. So I don't know. Basically, I think Tyjae Spears is better than Travis Etienne. And I didn't think I would have drawn that conclusion by the end of this season, even though like it hasn't been a great season for Tyjae Spears. He's dealt with a lot of injury issues, and um, some people, including me, were ranking him basically back to back with Tony Pollard back in August. That turned out to be a mistake, but these last couple of weeks have reminded us that Tyjae Spears is really, really good when he gets a chance.
You, the listeners, can help shape the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. Take our quick, easy survey at fantasypros.com/survey and share your feedback to help us improve. All it takes is just a minute or two at fantasypros.com/survey. Help us put our best foot forward and provide the best advice and entertainment and everything else that we can for you guys into the new season, new year, and future seasons. So again, that's fantasypros.com/survey. Please take the time to help us get better. All right, let's go to question number 6 here. Raiders, Saints. This definitely would have been a game I would have skipped if we weren't doing every game this week. Kendre Miller let fantasy managers down in a tough matchup in week 16. You kind of set our expectations lower last week, Fitz, given that matchup against the Packers, and you were proven correct on that one. If you started Kendre Miller and somehow survived and have a need at running back again in week 17, are you willing to go back to him in a much better matchup this week, assuming Alvin Kamara is out again?
Yeah, I still wouldn't feel great about it. We saw Kendre Miller split work last week with Jamal Williams and Jordan Mims, and just there wasn't a lot to split up because things were so bleak for the Saints offense, and they couldn't get first downs or move the chains. And I don't know. I guess I feel a little bit better about the outlook this week against the Raiders than I did in a tougher matchup against the Packers, but I don't think I would feel great about having Kendre Miller in my lineup regardless.
Where will you have him ranked?
Probably mid-range running back 3, like running back 32 or so.
That's a little lower than consensus. He's RB 27 in consensus as it sits. That's in the half PPR expert consensus rankings. So we'll see kind of where he winds up, but you're not that far off, just a little bit lower than the consensus ranking. Let's look at Colts Giants. I want to kind of just ask generally about really all the receivers in this game. I guess, on the Giants side of things, it's really just the one receiver and Neighbors and then a couple options for the Colts. But just given the quarterback situations that both teams are dealing with in terms of the passing game specifically, what is your confidence level ranking the receivers in this one?
Very low. In anyone but Malik Neighbors, and I think I'm below consensus on Neighbors too at like wide receiver 21. I don't have an Indianapolis wide receiver ranked inside my top 40. I've Downs at wide receiver 41 and Pittman is like 49 or 50 or something like that. There's just not a lot of passing volume with the Colts, not a lot of completions for Anthony Richardson most games. And, even though we don't hate the matchup for either of these passing games, I mean, you can throw on both the Colts and the Giants, but man, it's just with the level of quarterback play. And I like Richardson, but I like him as a runner and not so much as a passer.
So you're down on Neighbors. He is consensus wide receiver 17. So looking at guys kind of more in the range that you had in wide receiver 21, are you starting him over guys like DJ Moore, who will have played last night by the time everybody hears this, but we're sitting here, he hasn't played yet. Guy like him, guy like Jordan Addison, Garrett Wilson. Are these some of the names you'd be ranking him amongst, or still higher than that group?
I'm a little higher on Malik Neighbors than Garrett Wilson and Jordan Addison, but I think I might have DJ Moore ranked one spot higher than Malik Neighbors. And I'm looking at that now, and nope, I've still got Neighbors. Yeah, I do have Neighbors ranked one spot behind DJ Moore.
Okay. So we'll see how that pans out tonight on the DJ Moore side of things. I do have a second question in this game. Obviously, like everybody's starting Jonathan Taylor either way, but you do appear to be the low man on Taylor this week, at least in terms of our staff rankings. So I'm just kind of curious, considering what he did last week and the opponent against the Giants, why is he ranked a little bit lower for you this week?
Yeah, I could not rank Jonathan Taylor ahead of Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, or Chase Brown. Like those guys, just because of their usage, and in the case of Achane and Chase Brown in particular, their dual run catch usage. Couldn't put Taylor ahead of those guys. And I debated between Jonathan Taylor versus Kyren Williams. I think I went with Kyren one spot higher, but it's pretty much a coin flip between those two. So yeah, I mean, it's weird for me to be the low man on Jonathan
Yeah.
Taylor, Worm, but just trying to be objective, I did not see him as a top 5 RB this week.
Taylor almost single-handedly knocked me out of my family fantasy league, which my brother-in-law, who is the one who knocked me out, was very happy to bring up all day yesterday
I
on Christmas.
I mentioned this on the in our waiver show earlier in the week, but this is pretty strange. I was involved in 2 semifinals with Jonathan Taylor involved last week. I won the game where I was going against Jonathan Taylor and lost the game where I had
Wow.
Jonathan Taylor. That's
Wow.
that's pretty hard to pull off, man.
That's impressive. I had the same thing happen last year, not as to you, but just in terms of going up against a huge game where in week 16, I think it was week 16 last year. Also, the Amari Cooper huge blow up game.
Yes, the
Um,
200
I
yards.
also was knocked out facing him with a team where I had the best team, but just that one individual performance, guy drops 40 or 50 points from one player. That's just really hard to overcome. So that's remarkable that it went the other way twice for you. Um, in your defense on the ranking with Taylor, you're actually much closer to consensus. ECR has him 7th behind Saquon, Gibbs, Bijan, Derrick Henry, who's already played, Kyren Williams, Chase Brown. HN is behind Taylor in ECR. It's our staff guys, Debro and Erickson both have Taylor 2nd. So they're the ones who are kind of a lot higher than consensus, not that you are a lot lower. Let's go to another matchup here. Cowboys-Eagles. And again, given the time with the holiday of when we're recording this, we aren't 100% sure what the status of some of the health guys is going to be. But if Jalen Hurts doesn't play, what are you doing with your Eagles players playing with the backup quarterback who happens to be Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, so I'm still playing Saquon Barkley and AJ Brown. And like Saquon's a no-brainer. And Kenny Pickett, when he came in for Jalen Hurts last week, really locked on to AJ Brown. Like he only had eyes for AJB in that game. So I think AJ Brown's outlook would only be maybe slightly worse with Kenny Pickett than it would be with Jalen Hurts. But I do think Devontae Smith goes from playable to unplayable if Hurts sits this one out. And by the way, I know there were some doubts about Kenny Pickett's availability too, but I think last we saw he did practice in a limited capacity with a rib injury, but I think he would be good to go if Hurts were not able to clear concussion protocol before Sunday.
I don't want to spend too much time on this conversation because we have, some uncertainty about the quarterback, but I do want to throw out a second question on this game. On the Cowboys side of things, Rico Dowdle had a 3-week stretch where he was a top 15 fantasy running back every week. He's, been getting awesome volume. We've been happy to see him kind of finally take over this backfield. And then he fell back to earth in a major way against the Bucs. I think he had under 25 rushing yards. I think it was 23 was his total. He's got a tough matchup this week in Philly. Are you trusting Dowdle again or looking for other options in your title game?
I mean, mostly. I've been ranking Rico as like a low-end running back 1 the last few weeks, and now I've got him RB17 this week. But I think under most circumstances, you are playing him. Over the last 5 weeks, Rico Dowdle has averaged 19.4 carries, 21.4 touches, and 112 scrimmage yards per game. So it's been pretty good. I know he sort of ran aground last week against the Bucs, but despite the tough matchup, I'd feel okay with him as my RB2 this week.
Let's look at Panthers-Buccaneers. I want to ask about Bryce Young, who continues to just be immersed in the best stretch of his NFL career, coming off the best fantasy finish of his career. He was QB2 in Week 16. His only other game this season inside the top 10 at the position came against these Bucs. That was back in Week 13. So in this encore matchup here in the fantasy championship game, are you willing to trust Bryce Young as I'm not going to ask as a, in a one QB league, but as a super flex quarterback in your title game?
I think so. I mean, I've got him QB 24, which might be below consensus, but I think he's on the same tier as the guys I have directly ahead of him, which would be Mason Rudolph, Geno Smith, and Aaron Rodgers. I see all of those four on roughly the same tier. And we like the matchup against the Buccaneers. So I would feel okay about trotting out Bryce Young as my second quarterback in a super flex league.
Where are you going to have him ranked?
QB 24 right now.
24. So
Yeah.
right at the back.
Yeah. So I've got Mason Rudolph QB 21, Geno Smith QB 22, Aaron Rodgers QB 23.
I had so much fun just watching him. I mean, obviously, a lot of it came from the 60 yards and a rushing touchdown. In terms of this past week, we're getting over 27 fantasy points, but he's had a rushing touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games, and that adds a lot of value if you're especially coupling that with somewhere at 20 to 30 rushing yards as well. Obviously, 68 was a lot last week, but he was a very legitimate. He's been a very legitimate super flex starter worthy quarterback for like several weeks in a row now.
Yeah, you know what impressed me last week, Worm, was the way he has been handling pressure and making throws under pressure. There was one throw he made. I think there was like an A gap blitz bearing down on him, and he just stood in there and just ripped a throw over to the middle to one of his receivers on a crossing route where I'm like, wow. I mean, he looked like a Pro Bowl quarterback on that play. So there are signs of Bryce Young maybe turning the corner. Like, I don't know if I want to draft him to be my starting quarterback in a fantasy team in 2025, but in super flex leagues, I think he is a little more viable than certainly than he looked at mid-season this year.
I'm not the first person to make this comparison, but he looks like Alabama Bryce Young. It's some of the time, not
Yeah.
in every single play, but Alabama Bryce Young was an awesome college quarterback.
Yep.
And he has had stretches and had plays where he looks like that again, which is really fun to see. And I know everybody's like, again, I'm not the only one to say this, but it's just really nice to see him like smiling and take a hit and get up, and he's laughing and still making the play, and just given everything he went through last year and early parts of this year. It's been really cool to see. And boy, another feather in the cap for Dave Canales as a quarterback whisperer to do it with, did it with Geno, who still looked good since he left, did it with Baker, who still looked good since he left, but now to do it with Bryce Young too is really remarkable for Canales. Let's go to another matchup here. Dolphins-Browns. We're into the late afternoon slate here. Now, you're probably obligated to start Tyreek Hill, but I just want to kind of highlight his fantasy finishes at the position since Tua returned from the latest injury. Wide receiver 41, wide receiver 30, wide receiver 23, wide receiver 16, wide receiver 40, wide receiver 12, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 62, wide receiver 31. So there is a, top 6 finish in there. There's another top 12 finish in there, but there's a lot outside the top 40 too. He's ranked as a top 15 wide receiver option this week in ECR, but he's only finished that high twice since week 8. So what are your expectations against the Browns?
Oh man, I feel like we can't even use the word expectations with Tyreek Hill anymore because I don't think we have any. And certainly not the expectation of a smash game from Tyreek Hill in any given week, which is weird to say, especially with us looking at a week 17 game for Tyreek Hill where Jaden Waddle is probably not going to be playing for the Miami Dolphins with his knee injury. So, but look, man, it's Tyreek Hill, and he has scored a touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games. Again, no Waddle probably means a few extra targets. I have Tyreek ranked wide receiver 13. And I feel like that's a nice conservative ranking for a guy who obviously has been a disappointment this season. But I think unless you have an absolute embarrassment of riches at wide receiver, you're probably starting him in your championship game.
Yeah, 13 feels appropriate for the ranking, even if maybe like I don't really expect him to finish as wide receiver 13, but as far as like just where to put him in the rankings, I think that's better. He's wide receiver 14 in ECR, so one spot lower. But um, yeah, where do you think you're going to have him ranked in 2025 drafts?
That's a really good question. Probably still in wide receiver 1 range. I mean, it was just such a strange year for the Dolphins, and I don't know. I mean, maybe that's wrong, and it should be more as like a high end or mid range wide receiver 2. But I still fundamentally believe, like I came into this season thinking Tyreek Hill is the best wide receiver in football, and now I'll almost surely be ranking him behind Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, probably even Brian Thomas Jr. So yeah, I mean, maybe it's going to be well outside the top 10.
He'll be 31 next year. He turns 31 in March, and a guy who really relies on speed to be as dominant as he is. Coming off this season, when you say as a wide receiver 1, to me, like if you're ranked in the top 12 at wide receiver, you're not getting out of the second round of a lot of drafts. And I don't know that I would be very comfortable drafting Tyreek Hill in the second round. I think if it will be, and we'll see how I feel, come August. That's a long way from now. And maybe the situation will change around him in Miami. I mean, who knows? But as of right now, it feels to me like I wouldn't be comfortable taking him in the second round, but maybe I would be taking him like early third, and so maybe kind of more of a wide receiver 2 range. But that's kind of shooting from the hip. We'll obviously kind of need to sit down and think about it more when we get actually closer. But for a guy who's been locked into the first round for a lot of years, maybe we're starting to see the fall off here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, it's going to be one of those things where it will be a shock to the system if you're in a draft and you're sitting there with pick 103 and all of a sudden Tyreek is available to you at 210. That might be
Yeah.
really hard to pass on him, and like, maybe I could wait till 303, but I don't know if I want to wait. I might just want to grab this guy here.
Yeah, if you have like the 101 and let's say you take Saquon and then Tyreek gets back to you, like it's hard to imagine passing up the
Yeah.
opportunity to pair Saquon with Tyreek.
Yes.
But I certainly would say I don't think I'll be considering him in the first half of the second round. I think it would have to be a back half of the second
Agreed.
round. As of how I feel sitting here on in late December, 8 months away from having to make this decision. Packers-Vikings. Fitz, best game on the Week 17 schedule. Obviously, your team is involved here. Tons of fantasy options on both sides. So I just want to kind of force you to fade somebody in this one. Which guy who is an obvious start in this matchup are you actually fading this week?
It's funny. I've been low on Jordan Love relative to consensus for quite a few weeks just because the Packers passing volume has been so low. But now I see that I'm actually like 3 spots above consensus on Love this week. And I think that's largely matchup related. I mean, the Minnesota run defense is tough. And they're, not that hard to throw on. And we saw, I think Jordan Love had the most passing attempts in any game this season in his first meeting against the Vikings, but that was also a game where the game script went sideways for the Packers. They fell into this big hole early, and they basically had to stomp the accelerator and run a 2-minute offense the rest of the game. So Jordan Love wound up putting up huge numbers. I don't know if that happens again, but I'm optimistic he puts up decent numbers. I guess the guys I'm fading relative to consensus are Josh Jacobs, because that Minnesota run defense is tough. I've got him at like running back 9, and I know consensus is higher than that. And Jordan Addison, I mean, I'm a little below consensus. I think I've got him at wide receiver 28, and the ECR has him at wide receiver 22. He's terrific, but there's always a chance, and we saw it happen last week, that he plays second fiddle to Justin Jefferson in any given game. And Justin Jefferson, whenever he has not had to deal with Jair Alexander of the Packers, has always smashed. And I don't think Jair is coming back this week. So no Jair Alexander probably means another smash game for Justin Jefferson, and I don't know if there's also room for Jordan Addison to smash.
Let's go to Falcons-Commanders. Before we get to the key question for Sunday night's matchup, I want to ask you, Fitz, about your Uber Eats Sunday night meal of the week. Fitz, what must-order food gets you reaching for your Uber Eats app for great game day deals when you think of Washington, D.C.?
Oh man, I have to try this thing they call it's called a half smoke. Are you familiar with this, Worm? So it's like I'm from a big sausage town, Milwaukee. That is, we appreciate our sausages in Milwaukee, and this is apparently a half smoke is kind of like a spicier version of a chili dog. I guess it's some sort of sausage served with like chili and cheese and onions, and it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I am not like a big sausage guy in general, and so I've actually never had a half smoke, but it is like definitely a DC thing. And I think if I was able to kind of like I'm not like a big like spicy meat person, and typically half smoke like a little bit of spice to it. So I think I might be more interested in trying it actually now as I've sort of developed my palate a bit since leaving the DC area than I was interested in it when I was living here. So I would try that again at this point. For me, like when I think of DC food, like first of all, like being from the area, like you can get good food of any kind in this area. Like it's a very transient city, so there's not a ton that's been like originated from DC, but every type of food you can imagine has quality options in the area. Like you can get amazing like Peruvian chicken in the DC area. You can get amazing like anything really. Like you can go down the list, like any type of foreign cuisine that appeals to you, you can find some good options. But when I think of stuff that is like from DC, and my first thought just goes to mumbo sauce, which is like kind of it's like somehow like sweeter and also kind of spicier than barbecue sauce, but it's like a very classic condiment for DC. And just get some wings with mumbo sauce on them is like such a great go-to, especially for watching football. So half smoke for Fitz, mumbo sauce really on anything for myself. That's our Uber Eats Sunday night meals of the week. Uber Eats has the best game day deals all season long. Order now for game day. And by the way, technically the Commanders do play in Maryland, not in DC. So I could have just had another excuse to talk about crab cakes, but I will not do that. I want to ask in this one, how are you ranking the Falcons offensive players this week now that we've seen the first start from Michael Penix?
So I've got Penix ranked quarterback 28, and I almost feel guilty about that because I am a Michael Penix fan. I always want to be conservative with my ranking of a quarterback getting his first exposure to NFL defenses. And, we saw this last week with Penix. Played a decent game, but for fantasy, it wasn't a decent game. He had against the Giants, like I think it was 220 some yards and no touchdowns. So, maybe it seems inconsistent, but I'm ranking Drake London, wide receiver 17, Darnell Mooney, wide receiver 32, and Ray McLeod and Kyle Pitts I consider to be unplayable, basically. But I'm ranking the wide receivers basically where I would have had them with Kirk Cousins back when Kirk Cousins was playing semi competently. So like I feel okay about Michael Penix making those guys work for fantasy, but not so great about Penix himself.
Here's another interesting 2025 question. Where do you think you're going to have Penix ranked amongst quarterbacks for fantasy next year?
Probably late teens. Um, yeah, so I really like the player and I believe in the arm talent and think he is, one of the best arms in the league, but he is not going to add much as a runner. And some of the things he does best as a player don't always show up for fantasy, like his aversion to turnovers and sacks. You love that if you've got Michael Penix as your starting quarterback and you're a fan of the Atlanta Falcons. It just doesn't do much for you in the fantasy game.
I've got a second question in this Sunday night matchup. Just how much trust do you have going back to Brian Robinson after his huge letdown in Week 16? If he had his normal game, there are multiple leagues I would have advanced to the title game in without him. So maybe most people listening are not able to trust going back to him because they've already been eliminated. But if you did survive Brian Robinson's huge letdown in Week 16, how are you approaching him in Week 17?
And I actually did survive his letdown in two leagues where I will be rolling him out in a championship game.
You're
But yeah,
luckier than
like
I am.
I'm a little nervous about it. I'm a little nervous, to be honest with you. I mean, he did lose 2 fumbles last week, and if he puts another on the ground, there's a very good chance he sits and we see more playing time for Jeremy McNichols and Chris Rodriguez. And the Atlanta run defense, not exactly a pushover. They've given up only 4 rushing touchdowns to running backs this season, tied with the Los Angeles Chargers for the fewest, and they've allowed the 9th fewest rushing yards to running backs. So not a great matchup for Brian Robinson, but I do think the game script should be more favorable this week. We saw the Commanders sort of thrust into catch up mode last week against the Eagles. They should probably be playing with a lead, or at least in a close game with the Falcons throughout this game. So that bodes better for Brian Robinson than last week's game script.
Last game on the slate here, Monday night, Lions 49ers. Fitz, we got our first Jameson Williams spike week in a while against the Bears last week. Just his second game all season with over 100 receiving yards, though. Are you or are you not starting him in fantasy championship matchups against San Francisco?
Maybe. I've got him at wide receiver 29, so that probably puts him right on the start-sit border in a lot of cases. So over his last 7 games, JMO has had between 5 and 8 targets in every game, which is not terrible for a big play vertical wide receiver. But obviously he's got this boom or bust profile, and the targets are getting chopped up more ways than ever, I feel like, in Detroit these days, with suddenly Sam Laporta is getting targets again after being sort of, I don't know, a major target drought for him early in the season. He's starting to get back into the offense, and Tim Patrick has been pretty involved in this offense over the last month. So I think he's going to be a dilemma for a lot of people this week, Worm. I don't know what to make of him, but as we were talking about with Erickson, he's a nice guy to have if you're like an underdog, or if you're trying to play catch up after maybe falling into a hole with the Christmas Day games or the Thursday night game. Like, JMO is a guy, if you're a dog or have to make a comeback, you feel pretty good about having him because, you know, whatever, if he has a dud game and gets 30 some yards, you were probably going to lose anyway. But he's also the guy who could get you 170 yards and a touchdown if things break right.
So we kind of talked a lot about this a little bit on the Thursday show, but just for anybody who didn't catch that one, Monday night, you're down. You have Jameson Williams. They have nobody left. How many points would you need to be down for you to feel confident going into that situation with only Jameson Williams left?
Oh man, like if you've got the lead and you're going
No,
against,
the opposite. I guess you could do it really either way. But what is the line where you're feeling confident that Jameson Williams is overcoming this lead or deficit if you're on the other side of it?
oh man, like if I'm down with Jameson Williams, like
Like, because if
anything.
it's like 35 points, you're like, okay, maybe it happens, but like you would never. You're feeling pretty bad about that. 13, like okay, like it's possible, but it's not a guarantee. 3, okay, yeah, he's definitely getting that. What's the line where you're like, I'm feeling pretty good that Jameson Williams is going to be a fantasy hero for me?
I think I think it's pretty low. Like I think you need to only be like 7 down or 6 down or something like that, because that's the thing. I mean, JMO could give you 3 for 35, you know,
Yeah.
and PPR, that's 6.5 points. But at the same time, if I'm going against Jameson Williams, I don't want to be up at least 20 to feel good about my
Yeah.
chances. I would want a big cushion against Jameson Williams.
It's definitely scarier to be facing him in the final game of your fantasy title week than it is confident to be, throwing him out there for your team. I
Yes.
think he's
Yes.
more scary as an opponent than he is, instilling you with great
Yeah,
confidence
I
in your
think the
team.
JMO stakeholders have learned to live with the boom bust profile that you are inevitably going to get for him from him. But yes, going against Jameson Williams this week is a scary proposition for sure.
It's going to be a fun week. We've hit every matchup here. Fitz, any other kind of final thoughts, just, for the fantasy championship game? Any good luck charm you find yourself relying on? Are you one of those managers who likes to pick up like a Chris Godwin or, David Montgomery as kind of like an honorary bench spot in this title game? What's your mental approach to winning a championship?
No, it's just sort of a coincidence. I think I've been wearing my Tag Strong T-shirt on NFL Sundays for the last couple of weeks, and the fantasy playoffs have gone reasonably well so far. So I think I'm going to have to do some laundry before Sunday and make sure my Tag Strong T-shirt is clean for the big day.
Or maybe don't do some laundry. You want to leave it, the way it has been this whole time. I assume you haven't been washing it.
I'm just worried it's going to like walk out of the house if I don't get it in the laundry pretty soon.
All right, we'll wrap up there. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Hope D-Bro is enjoying the time with the in-laws. We are going to have a show next week. It's going to, I think, be a slightly varied version of this show, given that most fantasy championships are out. I'm not 100% sure what it's going to look like yet, but we will be back in some capacity next week. There will be a few shows next week, but maybe a more modified schedule compared to what we're doing all season long. But it's been a joy to do this show all season long. I hope we have helped somebody out there win a fantasy championship, and hopefully a whole lot of somebody's. So this is one of my favorite shows to do every week, Fitz. So it's been a pleasure to do it with you and with D-Bro again for the season. And I hope everybody else has enjoyed the ride too.
Yeah, likewise, Worm. This is one of my favorite shows to do, and just because a lot of times we spin off into completely unplanned directions over the course of the show, just things kind of come up organically, and I sort of like it that way.
Yeah, I do this too. Very fun show. So best of luck to everybody. Happy holidays for those who still have kind of festivities going on throughout the weekend. Thanks to my parents for hosting me for Christmas stuff and for letting me take over my mom's office to do these shows during the week. It's been it's always fun to play a road game and host from a different spot than usual. But shouts to everybody celebrating the holidays and celebrating hopefully a fantasy title this weekend for Fitz and D-Bro. I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time.